Marcus couldn't understand why the driver said, "This is my last journey," because the man was only 30 years old and looked perfectly healthy. The Arizona sun was relentless as Marcus stood beside Route 66, his weathered backpack at his feet and his wavy brown hair damp with sweat. His blue-green eyes scanned the sparse traffic hopefully, watching vintage cars and modern vehicles pass by the historic highway. He'd been waiting for nearly 2 hours and the afternoon heat was becoming unbearable. When the pristine red convertible pulled over, Marcus felt a surge of relief mixed with surprise. The car was a beautifully restored 1967 Mustang, its chrome gleaming in the sunlight. Classic rock played softly from the radio, and the driver wore sunglasses and a genuine smile. "Need a ride?" the driver called out over the engine's rumble. Desperately, Marcus replied, jogging toward the passenger side. "I'm heading west toward Flagstaff." "Perfect. I'm going that direction myself. Hop in." Marcus climbed into the convertible, immediately appreciating the leather seats and the cool breeze as they accelerated back onto Route 6. The driver looked to be in his early 30s, with dark hair, a strong jawline, and the kind of easy confidence that suggested someone comfortable in their own skin. "Thanks for stopping, I'm Marcus." "Name's Jake," the driver replied, extending his hand for a brief shake while keeping his eyes on the road. "Beautiful day for a drive, isn't it?" But there was something in Jake's tone that suggested this wasn't just casual conversation. As they cruised along the legendary highway, passing through small towns that seemed frozen in the 1950s, Marcus noticed that Jake was driving with unusual mindfulness. He slowed down to appreciate scenic overlooks, pulled over to photograph interesting landmarks, and seemed to be savoring every moment of the journey. "You really love this car," Marcus observed. "This car is part of my soul," Jake replied, running his hand affectionately over the steering wheel. "My grandfather bought it new in 1967. He taught me to drive in this car when I was 16. Family heirloom. Something like that." Jake's voice carried a weight that suggested there was much more to the story, but Marcus didn't want to pry. They drove in comfortable silence for several miles before Jake spoke again, and his words sent a chill through Marcus despite the warm afternoon air. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. This is my last journey." Marcus looked at Jake, trying to process what he'd just heard. "Your last journey? What do you mean?" "Exactly what it sounds like. After today, I won't be making this drive anymore." Marcus studied Jake more carefully. The man looked completely healthy, fit, energetic, with clear eyes and steady hands. There was no obvious sign of illness or distress. "Are you selling the car?" Marcus asked, though he sensed that wasn't the explanation. "No, I could never sell this car." "Then what do you mean?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tightening as he appeared to be wrestling with how much to reveal. "Let's just say I've made some decisions about my future, and those decisions mean this is the last time I'll drive Route 6. But the vagueness of Jake's explanation only raised more questions. Marcus felt increasingly uneasy. Jake didn't seem suicidal. His demeanor was calm, almost peaceful, but there was something final about the way he spoke, as if he were already saying goodbye to this part of his life. "Jake, are you okay? Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, Marcus. In fact, everything is finally right." The contradiction in that statement was striking. How could everything be right if this was Jake's last journey? As they approached a scenic overlook, Jake pulled over and cut the engine. The view stretched for miles across the painted desert, with rock formations glowing orange and red in the afternoon sun. "I want to show you something," Jake said, reaching into the glove compartment. He pulled out a leather-bound journal and handed it to Marcus. "This has been with me on every journey I've taken in this car over the past 12 years. Marcus opened the journal carefully, finding pages filled with handwritten entries, sketches of landscapes, and photographs tucked between the pages. But what caught his attention was the first entry, dated 12 years earlier. "June 15th, first journey after the diagnosis. The doctors say I have maybe 5 years, but I refuse to spend them in fear. I'm going to live more fully in whatever time I have left than most people live in their entire lives. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Jake, you're sick? Was sick, past tense. Jake explained that 12 years ago he'd been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. The prognosis had been grim, 5 years at most, probably less. The doctors recommended aggressive treatment, but the side effects would have left me too weak to do anything meaningful, so I made a different choice. Jake had declined the treatment, and instead decided to spend whatever time he had left traveling, experiencing life, and making memories in his grandfather's car. I figured I'd rather have 2 years of really living than 5 years of barely surviving. But Jake's story took an unexpected turn. The thing is, Marcus, I didn't die. In fact, the cancer went into remission on its own. Marcus stared at Jake in astonishment. Spontaneous remission? The doctors call it that. I call it a miracle. But whatever it was, here I am, 12 years later, still alive and healthier than ever. Then why is this your last journey? Jake's expression shifted to something Marcus couldn't quite read. Part sadness, part acceptance, part something else entirely. Because I've been living on borrowed time for 12 years, Marcus. I've structured my entire life around the idea that I could die at any moment. I never committed to relationships, never took a permanent job, never put down roots anywhere. But now you're healthy. You could keep traveling forever. That's the problem. I could, but I realized something recently. Living like you're dying is still a kind of death. Jake's revelation was profound in its simplicity. For 12 years I've been so focused on experiencing everything before I died that I never actually built a life. I've had amazing adventures, but I've never had a home. I've met incredible people, but I've never let anyone really know me. Jake explained that a few months ago he'd had a moment of clarity while sitting alone in a motel room in New Mexico. I realized I was more afraid of living than I was of dying. The cancer gave me permission to avoid all the difficult, messy parts of life. Commitment, vulnerability, responsibility. And now I'm choosing to live instead of just not dying. But Jake's decision to end his nomadic lifestyle was more complicated than it appeared. As they continued driving, Jake shared more details from his journal. 12 years of entries documented not just his travels, but his growing sense of isolation and disconnection. I've driven Route 66 47 times. I've seen the Grand Canyon 32 times. I've watched the sunset from this exact spot 18 times. At some point, Marcus, even the most beautiful experiences become empty if you're always experiencing them alone. Marcus understood what Jake was describing, the difference between moving through life and actually living it. So what changes after today? Everything. I've accepted a job offer in Phoenix. I'm selling my trailer and getting an apartment. I'm going to try dating someone for more than 3 weeks before moving on. Jake laughed, but there was nervousness in it. The fear of someone about to make a major life change. Basically, I'm going to do all the normal, boring things I've been avoiding for 12 years. But there was one more significant detail Jake hadn't mentioned yet. There's someone, Jake admitted. Her name is Sarah. We met 6 months ago at a diner in Tucson, and we've been talking every day since then. Jake pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a photo of a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. She wants me to stay. She's offering me something I haven't had in 12 years. A reason to stop running. That sounds like a good thing. It terrifies me, Marcus. What if I'm not good at being normal? What if I've forgotten how to stay in one place? Marcus recognized the fear in Jake's voice. The same fear anyone feels when leaving behind something familiar, even if that familiar thing has become limiting. Jake, you've spent 12 years proving you're brave enough to face death. Maybe now it's time to prove you're brave enough to face life. The observation seemed to strike Jake deeply. That's exactly what Sarah said. She told me that choosing to live fully requires more courage than choosing to die dramatically. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of purple and gold, Jake made one final stop at a roadside attraction, a vintage Route 66 motel that had been converted into a museum. I want to show you why this journey matters so much to me. Inside the museum, Jake led Marcus to a wall covered with photographs from Route 66's glory days. Among them was a black and white photo from 1967, showing a young couple standing beside a brand new red Mustang. That's my grandfather and grandmother on the day he bought this car. They were starting their honeymoon, driving from Chicago to Los Angeles. Jake's voice was thick with emotion as he continued. My grandfather told me that the journey they took in this car was the foundation of their marriage. They learned how to navigate together, how to handle disagreements, how to appreciate the small moments. And he gave you the car. He gave it to me when I got diagnosed. He said, this car has already carried one love story. Maybe it can help you find yours. But Jake had spent 12 years driving the car alone. I thought I was honoring his gift by experiencing everything I could before I died. But I realize now that I missed the point entirely. Jake explained that his grandfather hadn't given him the car to drive alone. He'd given it to him to share with someone. The car was never about the destination. It was about having someone beside you for the journey. As they walked back to the Mustang, Jake had one more revelation to share. Marcus, I need to tell you something. Picking you up today wasn't random. Marcus felt a spike of unease. What do you mean? I've picked up maybe 20 hitchhikers over the years. Every time I was looking for someone who would understand what I was going through. And did they? No. Most of them just wanted a free ride. They didn't want to hear about a dying man's existential crisis. Jake smiled sadly. But you asked questions. You listened. You didn't treat me like I was fragile or crazy. Marcus realized he'd been serving as a sounding board for Jake's internal struggle without fully understanding his role. Jake, I'm just a hitchhiker. I'm not a therapist or a life coach. Maybe that's why it worked. You didn't have an agenda. You just responded honestly to what I was telling you. But there was more to Jake's confession. Marcus, when I picked you up today, I was 90% sure I was going to end this journey by driving off one of these cliffs. The statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. What? Not suicide exactly. Just making the decision for me. Letting fate handle what I couldn't decide myself. Jake described the internal battle he'd been fighting for months between the familiar comfort of his nomadic lifestyle and the terrifying possibility of building something permanent with Sarah. Part of me thought if I just didn't survive this drive, the decision would be made. Sarah would move on and I wouldn't have to face my fear of failing at a normal life. Marcus felt sick. Jake, that's suicidal ideation disguised as fatalism. I know. I've been in therapy for 3 months trying to work through it. But talking to Marcus had shifted something in Jake's thinking. Hearing myself explain this journey to you, I realized how insane it sounds. I've been treating my life like it's already over just because I'm afraid of it really beginning. Jake turned to face Marcus directly. You asked me earlier why this is my last journey. The real answer is that I'm choosing to stop running. I'm choosing Sarah. I'm choosing Phoenix. I'm choosing to be terrified of normal life instead of hiding from it. As the sun set completely and stars began to appear in the desert sky, Jake drove Marcus the remaining miles to Flagstaff. The journey that had begun with cryptic statements about last journeys had evolved into a conversation about what it means to truly live. When they reached the Flagstaff city limits, Jake pulled over one final time. Marcus, I want to thank you for being here today. You probably saved my life, even though you had no idea it needed saving. I didn't do anything except listen. Sometimes that's everything. Jake handed Marcus a business card with his phone number. When I get settled in Phoenix, when I've figured out how to be normal, I'd like to hear about your travels. I want to know how your story continues. And I want to know how yours continues too. But the night held one more surprise. As Marcus was getting out of the car, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize with a Phoenix area code. Marcus, this is Sarah. Jake's Sarah. Marcus was confused about how she had his number until Jake explained that he'd texted it to her while Marcus was looking at the museum exhibits. "Marcus, Jake told me what you two talked about today. I wanted to thank you for helping him see that choosing life isn't the same as giving up adventure. I didn't do much. You did more than you know. Jake's been running from commitment since before I met him. Today something changed, and he said it was because a hitchhiker asked him the right questions." Sarah's voice carried both gratitude and relief. "I've been waiting 6 months for him to choose me. Today he finally did." After ending the call, Marcus sat on a bench near the drop-off point, processing the evening's revelations. Jake had picked him up expecting it to be his last journey, possibly his last day alive. Instead, it had become the first day of a completely different kind of life. Marcus realized that Jake's story was about the distinction between existing and living. Jake had spent 12 years existing in a state of perpetual transition, never fully committing to anything because he believed he was dying, but surviving hadn't automatically taught him how to live. That required a different kind of courage. The courage to be ordinary, to fail at things, to disappoint people, to be vulnerable. 6 months later, Marcus received a text message from Jake with a photo attached. The photo showed Jake and Sarah standing beside the red Mustang, but this time the car was parked in front of a small house with a sold sign in the yard. "Remember when I said this was my last journey? I was right, but not in the way I thought. It was my last journey alone. Now every journey is shared, and that makes all the difference. Thank you for being there on the day I chose to stop dying and start living. Jake." The message included an invitation to visit Phoenix whenever Marcus's travels took him that direction. A year later, Marcus did visit, and found Jake transformed in ways that went beyond just having a permanent address. Jake looked happier, but also more tired. The kind of tired that comes from working a demanding job and maintaining a relationship and dealing with mortgage payments and all the mundane responsibilities he'd been avoiding for 12 years. "Is it what you expected?" Marcus asked over coffee. "It's harder than I expected," Jake admitted. "Traveling was actually easier because I could always leave when things got difficult. Now I have to stay and work through problems." "Any regrets?" "Not even for a second." Jake and Sarah were planning to get married in 6 months, and they wanted to take their honeymoon drive along Route 66, following in his grandparents' footsteps in the same car that had carried 3 generations of family stories. "The car finally gets to fulfill its purpose," Jake said. "It was never meant to be a vehicle for running away. It was meant to be a vehicle for journeying together." But Jake had more news to share. "Marcus, remember how I told you about picking up hitchhikers over the years? Trying to find someone who would understand my existential crisis? Yes. I've started volunteering with a cancer support organization, specifically helping people who've survived their prognosis and don't know how to transition back to normal life." Jake explained that there were more people like him than anyone realized. People who'd prepared themselves for death and then didn't know how to prepare themselves for continued life. "They call us unexpected survivors. We're the people who beat the odds but then struggle with survivor's guilt, purposelessness, and fear of commitment." Jake's experience had given him unique insight into helping others navigate the psychological aftermath of surviving terminal diagnoses. It turns out that learning to live after expecting to die is a skill that needs to be taught, just like anything else. Marcus learned that Jake was working with therapists and medical professionals to develop support programs specifically for unexpected survivors. "We focus on helping people understand that surviving doesn't mean you failed to die. It means you succeeded at living." The distinction was subtle, but profound. A lot of unexpected survivors feel guilty that they didn't die when they were supposed to. They feel like they're taking up space that was meant for someone else. Jake described working with people who'd alienated family members, burned through savings, or made irreversible life decisions based on terminal prognosis that turned out to be wrong. The challenge is helping them see that the life they're living now is real, not borrowed time or a bonus round. 3 years after their first meeting, Marcus attended Jake and Sarah's wedding. The ceremony was held at that same scenic overlook on Route 66, where Jake had first shown Marcus his journal. The red Mustang was decorated with flowers and served as the backdrop for wedding photos. During his speech, Jake mentioned Marcus by name, explaining how a conversation with a hitchhiker had helped him choose life over fear. Marcus asked me why I was treating my last journey like a death sentence when it could have been a beginning. That question changed everything. Sarah added her own thanks. Marcus, you helped give me my husband. For that, I'll be forever grateful. But the most moving moment came from an unexpected source. Jake's grandfather, now in his 90s, attended the wedding and saw his Mustang being used for its intended purpose, celebrating love and commitment, rather than facilitating escape. When I gave Jake that car, I was worried he'd use it to run away from life, the old man told Marcus. Turns out he needed to run away for a while so he could find his way back home. Jake's grandfather revealed that he'd also survived a serious illness in his 30s and had dealt with similar fears about committing to a normal life. The car has always been about carrying people through their transitions, from fear to courage, from isolation to connection, from surviving to living. Marcus learned that the Mustang had become a family symbol spanning 3 generations, each time helping someone navigate the transition from one kind of life to another. 5 years after their first meeting, Jake and Sarah invited Marcus to meet their daughter. The little girl was 2 years old, full of energy and curiosity. Jake held her carefully as she reached toward the shiny chrome of the Mustang, now kept in pristine condition in their garage. One day this car will be hers, Jake said. And hopefully it will help her navigate whatever transitions she faces in her life. Sarah added, we're teaching her that the car isn't about running away or towards something. It's about being present for the journey, whoever you're sharing it with. Marcus realized that Jake's last journey had actually been the beginning of generations of new journeys, each one built on the foundation of choosing connection over isolation. But Jake had one more revelation for Marcus. You know what I realized recently? That day I picked you up, I told myself it was my last journey because I thought I was at the end of something. But what I was actually at was a crossroads. Jake explained that he'd been confusing endings with transitions, death with transformation. I wasn't dying, I was changing. And change always feels like death when you're going through it. Marcus understood the distinction. Jake hadn't needed to end his journey. He'd needed to evolve it into something that could accommodate growth rather than just movement. Every journey ends eventually, Jake continued. But that doesn't mean the traveler ends. It just means they're ready for a different kind of journey. As Marcus prepared to leave Phoenix and return to his own travels, Jake had final words of wisdom. Marcus, you're still out there on the road, and that's exactly where you should be right now. But eventually, you'll have your own last journey moment. How will I know? You'll know because you'll realize that what you're running toward is actually behind you, or beside you, or waiting for you to stop moving long enough to notice it. Jake's experience had taught him that the purpose of journey isn't always to reach a destination. Sometimes it's to prepare you to finally be still. When that moment comes, I hope you'll be as brave about stopping as you've been about moving. Marcus returned to hitchhiking with a new understanding of what it meant to be on a journey. Not every ride was about getting from point A to point B. Sometimes rides were about meeting people at crossroads, people who needed to articulate their choices to a stranger before they could commit to them with the people they loved. Jake's last journey hadn't been about dying or even about stopping traveling. It had been about transitioning from movement motivated by fear to stillness motivated by love. The red Mustang that had seemed like a symbol of freedom had actually been a vehicle for facing what Jake feared most: the ordinary, unglamorous, demanding work of building a life with another person. 10 years after their first meeting, Marcus received a letter from Jake. Dear Marcus, this year marks 22 years since my terminal diagnosis. I'm officially considered cured now, though I know cancer survivors never truly feel cured. But more importantly, This year marks 10 years since the day you asked me why I was calling it my last journey. I've been thinking about that conversation a lot lately, because our daughter is starting to ask questions about the car in the garage, and why it's so special to our family. How do I explain to a 10-year-old that the car represents the space between running away and running toward something? I think I figured it out. I'll tell her that the car is about choosing when to move and when to stay, about understanding that both require courage, but different kinds of courage. And I'll tell her about the hitchhiker who asked exactly the right question at exactly the right moment, helping a scared man understand that the end of one kind of journey is always the beginning of another. Thank you for being there, Marcus. Thank you for listening. Thank you for helping me see that my last journey wasn't an ending. It was a transformation. Your friend, Jake. Marcus kept the letter in his own journal, adding it to his collection of stories from the road. Jake's story had taught him that everyone is on some kind of last journey. The last journey of their 20s. The last journey as a single person. The last journey before becoming a parent. The last journey before commitment. The last journey before transformation. The key is recognizing which journey you're actually on and having the courage to let it take you where you need to go, even if that's somewhere completely different from where you thought you were heading. Sometimes the most important journey ends exactly where it's supposed to. Not at a destination, but at a decision. And sometimes a stranger's question is all it takes to help someone see that the end of one road is always the beginning of another.